I'm Natasha, 32, and I've always been the invisible daughter next to my golden child brother Matthew. When Dad died after his long battle with cancer, I expected some recognition for the months I spent caring for him. Instead, at the attorney's office, I discovered the truth about my place in the family. If you've ever felt like the forgotten child in your family, stick around. What I discovered in that attorney's office changed everything, and what I did next. Let's just say nobody saw it coming. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself in a family that didn't see your worth. Growing up in the shadow of my father Robert's expectations was like trying to catch sunlight in your hands, impossible and frustrating. From my earliest memories, our family dynamic was crystal clear. Matthew could do no wrong, while I could never quite do enough right. When Matthew scored A B on his math test, Mom Diana would tape it proudly to the refrigerator. When I brought home straight A's, she'd nod and say, "That's what we expect from you, Natasha." The disparity was subtle but constant. Our family celebrations always orbited around Matthew's achievements. His Little League games became family events with grandparents invited and elaborate dinners afterward. My piano recitals? Mom would check her watch throughout, and Dad would often have important work calls that prevented his attendance altogether. I still remember my 10th birthday when half the party conversation centered around Matthew's recent science fair win. I blew out my candles wishing to be seen. Family vacations followed the same pattern. If Matthew wanted to go to the beach, we went to the beach, despite my severe sunburns and preference for mountains. If Matthew wanted to try the expensive restaurant, Dad would splurge, but when I asked to visit a museum that interested me, money suddenly became tight. I learned early that my preferences were optional extras in our family storyline. This dynamic shaped me in ways I'm still discovering. By 13, I was fiercely independent, not by choice but necessity. I became the family problem solver because no one else bothered to notice what I needed. When my bike broke, I learned to fix it myself because Dad was busy teaching Matthew to throw a football. When I needed help with a school project, I figured it out alone while Mom spent hours helping Matthew with his. My teenage years only widened the gap. While Matthew received a brand new car for his 16th birthday, I was told I could use Mom's old sedan when available. When college application time came, my parents attended every campus tour with Matthew, discussing options over elaborate dinners. For my applications, they signed the necessary forms and reminded me to apply for scholarships. The message was clear: Matthew's future was a family investment. Mine was my own responsibility. College became my first taste of true independence. While Matthew attended an expensive private university with full parental support, I juggled 3 part-time jobs while maintaining a scholarship at the state school. I worked as a barista opening shifts, a library assistant during afternoons, and a waitress on weekends. My parents called these jobs character building while paying Matthew's fraternity dues. The irony wasn't lost on me when Mom would call, not to check on my well-being, but to ask if I could edit Matthew's papers between my shifts. My graduation day should have been triumphant. I finished with honors, debt-free, through sheer determination. But even this accomplishment was overshadowed when Matthew announced he'd received a job offer at a prestigious firm, never mind that he'd gotten the interview through Dad's connections. The celebration dinner that night became a toast to Matthew's bright future, with my achievement mentioned as an afterthought. The pattern continued into our adult years. When Matthew decided to buy his first house, our parents contributed significantly to his down payment. When I purchased my modest condo a year later, Mom sent a houseplant with a note saying, "So proud of your independence." The financial disparity was glaring, but the emotional message cut deeper. Matthew needed and deserved support. I was expected to fend for myself. It was during this time I met Nathan at a friend's gallery opening. He noticed things about me that my family never had: my quiet determination, my dry humor, my thoughtful approach to problems. More importantly, he noticed the family dynamic immediately. After his first holiday dinner with my family, he sat stunned in the car afterward. "Do they always talk over you like that?" he asked. "And did your mom really just take the dessert you brought and present it as her own?" Having someone finally see what I'd experienced my entire life was both validating and heartbreaking. A particularly revealing family dinner occurred 3 years ago. I had just received a significant promotion at the marketing firm where I worked. I mentioned it briefly as we passed the potatoes, and my mother nodded before immediately turning to Matthew. "Tell everyone about your new project proposal," she urged, beaming. Matthew launched into a detailed explanation of his idea, one that hadn't even been approved yet, while everyone listened attentively. Later that same evening, when Nathan pointedly brought up my promotion again, my father looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't know you were up for a promotion," he said, though I'd mentioned my candidacy during our last 3 phone calls. As adults, our divergent paths became even more pronounced. I built a stable career through strategic moves and hard work. Meanwhile, Matthew bounced between jobs, always with a story about why the company wasn't the right fit or how his boss couldn't recognize talent. Despite his professional instability, our parents continued to praise his ambition and refusing to settle. When he needed financial help between positions, they readily provided it, calling their support investments in his future. Matthew's marriage to Victoria seemed to solidify his position as the family favorite. Victoria, with her polished appearance and social savvy, charmed my parents instantly. She knew exactly how to compliment Mom's cooking and laugh at Dad's jokes. More tellingly, she quickly learned to participate in the family dynamic, subtly dismissing my accomplishments while amplifying Matthew's. They became a united front against my inclusion in any meaningful family decisions. When Dad's health began deteriorating 2 years ago, the true nature of our family roles became impossible to ignore. I took unpaid leave from my job to help with his care, administering medications, coordinating with doctors, and providing the hands-on support he needed. Matthew, meanwhile, managed the finances remotely, calling in weekly from his home 3 states away. Mom would praise his critical help with the paperwork, while I sat beside Dad during chemotherapy sessions, held his hand through painful nights, and adjusted my entire life to be present. During those months of caregiving, I clung to the hope that my presence mattered, that this sacrifice would finally be seen. Dad occasionally had moments of lucidity and gratitude, weakly squeezing my hand and thanking me for being there. Those small acknowledgments sustained me through the exhaustion and heartache. I believed, perhaps naively, that this shared experience of his illness would finally balance the scales of family recognition. I couldn't have been more wrong. Lawrence Henderson's law office exuded the kind of prosperity that whispers rather than shouts. Mahogany furnishings gleamed under soft lighting, and the waiting room chairs were upholstered in buttersoft leather that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The atmosphere felt heavy with expectation, like the air before a thunderstorm. I sat rigidly upright, keenly aware of the invisible currents of tension flowing between the room's occupants. Mom had positioned herself in the center of the small sofa, her black dress immaculately pressed, her eyes red-rimmed but dry now. She clutched a monogrammed handkerchief that Dad had given her on their anniversary years ago. Matthew sat beside her, one arm protectively around her shoulders, the very picture of the dutiful son. His somber expression might have been convincing if I hadn't caught him checking stock prices on his phone minutes earlier. Victoria perched on Mom's other side, her designer morning outfit, somehow managing to be both appropriate and flattering. Her sleek bob didn't have a hair out of place, and the subtle smirk that occasionally tugged at her lips when she glanced my way made my stomach tighten. Nathan sat beside me, his warm hand covering mine, a silent anchor in the choppy seas of family politics. His presence reminded me that regardless of what happened in this room, I wasn't alone anymore. When Henderson's assistant ushered us into the main office, the seating arrangement naturally replicated itself. Mom, Matthew, and Victoria on one side, Nathan and I on the other. The physical division felt symbolic of the emotional reality I'd lived with for decades. Henderson himself was a study in professional neutrality, silver-haired and silver-tongued, with the practiced compassion of someone who delivers life-altering news on a regular basis. "Before we begin," he said, shuffling papers with manicured hands, I want to express my sincere condolences for your loss. Robert was not only a client, but someone I considered a friend. He nodded particularly toward Mom, who dabbed at her eyes in response. I noticed he didn't look at me during this statement, and a cold prickle of foreboding crawled up my spine. The reading began with standard legal preamble, statements establishing Dad's sound mind, revocation of previous wills, appointment of executors. I listened with increasing confusion as Henderson methodically worked through paragraphs of legalese without mentioning any specific bequest to me. The confusion slowly crystallized into dread as he continued. To my son, Matthew Robert Wilson, I leave the entirety of my financial assets, including but not limited to banking accounts, investment portfolios, retirement funds, and life insurance policies. Additionally, I leave him full ownership of Wilson Family Properties LLC, including the family home and vacation property in Lake Tahoe. The words hit me like physical blows. I felt the blood drain from my face as Henderson continued without pause. It is my belief that Matthew will manage these assets responsibly for the benefit of the family. To my daughter, Natasha Lynn Wilson, I leave my grandfather's pocket watch, which she always admired as a child. A pocket watch. After months of caregiving, years of being the responsible one, a lifetime of trying to earn recognition, I received a pocket watch I had commented on once when I was 10 years old. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Nathan's grip tightened on my hand, his knuckles white with suppressed anger. I don't remember much of what followed. Henderson's voice continued, detailing instructions for Matthew to provide for Diana's needs and consider his sister's well-being when appropriate. Consider. Not guarantee, not ensure, consider. As if my financial security was an afterthought, a charitable notion my brother might entertain if he felt generous. I maintained my composure through sheer force of will. Years of having my emotions dismissed had taught me to keep them hidden. Externally, I nodded at appropriate moments, my face a careful mask of dignified acceptance. Internally, a hurricane raged, tearing through the last vestiges of familial loyalty I had preserved. Matthew performed his role perfectly. I'm honored by Dad's trust, he said, his voice appropriately solemn. I'll make sure the family is taken care of. The sincerity in his tone might have fooled someone who hadn't watched him practice facial expressions in the mirror growing up. Mom patted his hand gratefully, still not meeting my eyes. Victoria didn't even attempt to hide her satisfaction. Her perfectly lined lips curved upward as she rubbed Matthew's shoulder supportively. Your father knew you'd handle everything perfectly, she cooed, the triumphant glance she shot my way unmistakable. As Henderson concluded the formal reading, he hesitated for the first time. There are, of course, various accounts and arrangements that remain active, he said, shuffling through a separate folder. Natasha, you're still listed as a co-signer on several accounts that were established years ago. We'll need to update those authorizations in the coming weeks. This seemingly administrative comment cut through my emotional fog. Co-signer. On several accounts. My mind raced back to when Dad had added me to some family accounts during my college years. Just in case of emergency, he'd said. I'd forgotten about those arrangements, rarely using that access except when specifically asked to handle something during his illness. Additionally, Henderson continued, there are several automatic payments and transfers that have been established from these accounts. Matthew, you'll want to review these with your financial advisor to ensure they align with your management strategy going forward. As if summoned by cosmic timing, my phone vibrated with a notification. A monthly transfer of $2,000 had just been processed from one of the joint accounts to Matthew's personal account, a transfer I'd never known about until this moment. The notification, arriving in the middle of this meeting, felt like the universe handing me a key to a locked door. As we gathered our things to leave, I overheard Victoria whispering to Matthew near the coat rack. Finally, she said, her voice barely audible. No more having to pretend we're broke. Did you see her face? Priceless. Matthew hushed her, but his answering smile told me everything I needed to know about their true feelings. The pocket watch felt impossibly heavy in my palm as Henderson handed it to me with practiced sympathy. Your father mentioned you had admired it, he said, his discomfort evident. If you have any questions about the will, please don't hesitate to contact my office. Nathan placed a protective arm around my shoulders as we walked toward the exit. Mom finally approached me, her expression a mix of guilt and defensiveness. "Your father knew what he was doing," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Matthew will make sure you're taken care of." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the mother I desperately sought approval from all these years, but a woman who had made her choice long ago. "I've been taking care of myself for years," I replied quietly. "I don't see why that would change now." As we walked to the car, the weight of betrayal threatened to crush me. But beneath it, something else was forming, a cold clarity and the first sparks of a plan. The moment Nathan shut the car door behind us in the attorney's parking lot, the carefully constructed facade I'd maintained crumbled completely. Sobs tore from my chest with such force it felt like my ribs might crack. Nathan didn't offer empty reassurances or tell me everything would be okay. He simply held me, creating a safe harbor in the storm of emotions. "They planned this," I managed between gasps. "All those years of making me the responsible one. All those months I spent caring for Dad while Matthew managed things remotely, they were setting this up all along." The betrayal cut deeper than the financial implications. It was the final, irrefutable confirmation of what I'd suspected my whole life. In my parents' eyes, I would always be secondary. The watch in my purse felt like a cruel joke, a trinket tossed to pacify the family afterthought. When we arrived home, my best friend Rachel was waiting at my door, alerted by Nathan's text about the will reading. She took one look at my face and opened her arms. "Tell me everything," she said, guiding me inside and putting on the kettle. For the next several hours, I poured out the whole painful story while she listened, her expression cycling through shock, outrage, and fierce protectiveness. "This is financial abuse," Rachel declared, her background in social work coming to the fore. "And emotional abuse, too. The way they've conditioned you to accept scraps of attention and recognition your whole life, while Matthew gets everything handed to him." While I talked with Rachel, Nathan had been uncharacteristically quiet, his laptop open on the kitchen counter. "Natasha," he said during a pause in the conversation, "I think you should see this." He turned the screen toward me, showing a downloaded statement from one of the accounts Henderson had mentioned. The transaction history revealed a pattern that made my blood run cold. Regular transfers to Matthew over the past year, growing in size and frequency during Dad's illness. "He was draining the accounts while you were changing Dad's 4 bags, Nathan said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "And there's more. Look at these credit card charges, designer clothes, expensive restaurants, luxury hotels. All while you were taking unpaid leave to provide care." The sense of betrayal transformed into something harder, sharper. I spent that night cycling through grief, rage, and determination. By morning, I had resolved to investigate exactly what had been happening behind my back. For the first time, I was grateful for my detail-oriented nature and the fact that I'd saved every email and text message exchanged during Dad's illness. The next week became an archaeological dig into family financial history. I discovered emails where Matthew had told our parents I didn't want to be involved in financial discussions. A blatant lie contradicted by my own requests for transparency. I found evidence of Matthew's gambling problem in the form of large withdrawals from family accounts followed by deposits to online betting sites. Tax issues with a family business Matthew had supposedly been managing revealed themselves in a series of urgent notices filed away without resolution. Most shocking was the discovery that Matthew had taken out a second mortgage on our parents' house 6 months before Dad's death, a transaction that required Dad's signature but which, given his condition at the time, raised serious questions about whether he had truly understood what he was signing. "They didn't just leave me nothing," I told Nathan one night as we reviewed the mounting evidence. "They let Matthew systematically dismantle the family finances while I was distracted by Dad's care. And now he has legal control to finish the job." Rachel suggested I see her therapist, Dr. Jenkins, who specialized in family trauma. In those sessions, I began to recognize patterns I'd normalized my entire life. "You've been conditioned to view your needs as secondary," Dr. Jenkins explained. Your brother learned to expect his needs would always be primary. These are deeply ingrained family roles that won't change without direct confrontation. Through therapy, journaling, and long conversations with Nathan and Rachel, my perspective gradually shifted. I moved from feeling like a victim of circumstance to recognizing I had options, power, and agency in this situation. The realization was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. One evening, while reviewing account documents, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The joint accounts Henderson had mentioned weren't just minor secondary accounts. They were the primary family accounts that now contained the bulk of the inheritance. My status as co-signer hadn't been updated or removed. Legally, I still had full access and authorization. I need to understand exactly what this means, I told Nathan, already reaching for my phone. The next day, I met with Jessica, a financial advisor recommended by Rachel. Her office was nothing like Henderson's, practical, welcoming, with certificates from women's business associations on the walls. As a co-signer with equal authorization, you have the same legal rights to manage these accounts as your brother, Jessica explained after reviewing the documentation. Your father may have left everything to Matthew in his will, but he didn't complete the process of removing you from these accounts. Legally speaking, you have the right to protect these assets from mismanagement. A plan began to form in my mind, not out of vengeance, but out of a desire for justice and the protection of what remained of my parents' legacy. If Matthew had been bleeding the accounts dry during Dad's illness, how much worse would it be now that he had explicit permission? To confirm my legal standing, I consulted with Marcus Williams, an attorney specializing in estate disputes. Unlike Henderson, Marcus listened without judgment as I explained the situation and presented the evidence I'd gathered. Your case is unusual but not unprecedented, he said, reviewing the account documents. Your father's will express his wishes, but the existing account structures give you legal standing to act. Given the evidence of financial mismanagement, you could potentially contest the will entirely, but that would be a lengthy and expensive process with no guaranteed outcome. I don't want to fight over the inheritance, I clarified. I just want to stop the bleeding before there's nothing left for anyone, including my mother, who doesn't seem to realize what's happening. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Then you may have a more immediate option. As a legal co-signer on these accounts, you have the authority to monitor and, if necessary, halt transactions that appear suspicious or damaging. That night, I created a detailed inventory of all accounts I still had legitimate access to, noting recent transaction patterns and scheduled automatic payments. The picture that emerged was disturbing: steady drains from primary accounts into Matthew and Victoria's personal spending, with minimal funds directed toward actual family expenses or mom's needs. Nathan expressed concern as I outlined my forming plan. Are you sure about this? They're going to be furious. There could be serious blowback. I showed him the latest discovery: credit card statements showing Victoria had spent nearly $12,000 on luxury items in the month since Dad's death, all from family accounts.
I'm sure about this, I said.
Someone has to stop them before there's nothing left. The final confirmation came unexpectedly. Mom called one afternoon, sounding distracted. Natasha, do you remember where Dad kept the property tax information? Matthew says he can't find it and the payment is due next week. It's in the filing cabinet, third drawer under property. I replied automatically. Has Matthew been helping with the household expenses? I asked carefully. Mom's hesitation spoke volumes. Well, he's been very busy settling everything. I'm sure he'll get to it once things calm down. Victoria says they're reviewing all the finances carefully. After we hung up, I made my decision. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting what remained of my parents' assets, including ensuring Mom's financial security. With renewed determination, I opened my laptop and began executing my plan. With clarity of purpose guiding me, I developed a strategic approach to address the financial situation. Jessica, my financial advisor, helped me create a comprehensive spreadsheet tracking every automatic payment and transfer scheduled from the accounts I co-signed. The patterns revealed were disturbing: substantial sums flowing to Matthew and Victoria's personal accounts under vague labels like family management, and property expenses. These transfers have increased 340% in the last year, Jessica noted, highlighting a particularly concerning trend. And there's minimal documentation justifying these expenses. As a co-signer with fiduciary responsibility, you have not just the right but potentially the obligation to question these transactions. Marcus, my attorney, reviewed the legal aspects of my planned intervention. Document everything, he emphasized. Every action you take, every communication you have about these accounts. Maintain a clear record showing your intent is protective rather than retaliatory. I spent a weekend creating a detailed timeline correlating Matthew's financial activities with Dad's declining health. Large withdrawals occurring days after major medical setbacks, new credit accounts opened as Dad became less lucid. The pattern suggested opportunistic exploitation rather than responsible management. Nathan remained supportive but cautious. I understand why you need to do this, he said one evening as we reviewed the final plan. But these are the people who raised you. Are you prepared for what this might do to your relationship with them? I considered his question carefully. The relationship I thought we had was an illusion, I finally replied. They showed me who they really are at that attorney's office. Now I'm showing them who I really am, someone who won't be taken advantage of anymore. Rachel helped me role-play potential confrontations, preparing me for the emotional manipulation likely to follow my actions. They'll try to make you feel guilty, unreasonable, ungrateful, she warned. Remember what Dr. Jenkins said about holding your boundaries. After 2 weeks of meticulous preparation, I was ready. On a Tuesday morning when I knew Matthew would be in meetings and Mom would be at her weekly bridge game, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, phone, and a folder of documentation. Nathan sat beside me, a silent supporter, as I logged into the first account. The interface was familiar. I'd helped Dad manage these accounts during his illness, though I now realized Matthew had been working behind the scenes the entire time. With steady hands, I navigated to the automatic transfers section and began methodically canceling each recurring payment to Matthew and Victoria's personal accounts. For each cancellation, I documented the date, time, amount, and recipient in my spreadsheet. I didn't touch legitimate household expenses or medical bills, only the excessive personal transfers that had no clear family purpose. With each completed action, I felt a mixture of anxiety and empowerment. Transfer cancellation confirmed flashed on the screen again and again. By midday, I had systematically halted over $14,000 in monthly transfers to accounts controlled exclusively by Matthew and Victoria. I left intact all payments for the mortgage, utilities, property taxes, and Mom's personal expenses. Are you okay? Nathan asked, noticing my shaking hands as I completed the last cancellation. I think so, I replied, surprised to find tears streaming down my face. I just realized I've spent my whole life trying to earn their approval, and in one morning, I've probably destroyed any chance of ever getting it. You're not destroying anything, he said firmly. You're protecting what's left of your parents' legacy from people who see it as their personal ATM. The fact that those people happen to be family doesn't make it right. As a final step, I set up text alerts for any account activity over $100, ensuring I would be notified of any attempts to re-establish the canceled transfers or create new ones. Then I closed my laptop and waited for the inevitable storm. Rachel texted throughout the day, checking in. Remember, you're not the villain here, she wrote. You've done nothing wrong by protecting assets you're legally responsible for. To my surprise, the immediate aftermath was silence. No angry calls from Matthew, no tearful messages from Mom. Days passed with no reaction, though my phone alerts confirmed the canceled transfers had indeed failed to process. Each night, I reviewed the accounts, noting with grim satisfaction that no new transfers had been attempted. Maybe they haven't noticed yet, Nathan suggested after a week of silence. Or maybe they're consulting with Henderson about their options. They've noticed, I said with certainty. Matthew checks those accounts daily. He's planning something, figuring out his approach. The waiting became its own form of stress. I continued my therapy sessions with Dr. Jenkins, working through complex feelings of guilt, grief, and determination. You've disrupted a long-established family dynamic, she observed. That's going to trigger powerful reactions, both from them and within yourself. By the third week, doubts began creeping in. Had I overreacted? Was I becoming the vindictive person they would surely paint me as? I found myself checking my phone constantly, jumping whenever it chimed with a notification. This is exactly what they want, Rachel reminded me during a particularly difficult moment of wavering. They're using silence as a weapon, hoping you'll crack and reach out first, apologizing and backing down. Stay the course. I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction and the normalcy of professional challenges that had clear solutions. Nathan and I began tentatively discussing our future, perhaps purchasing a home together, something that had seemed financially impossible before but now felt within reach if I maintained financial independence. And then, exactly 1 month after I had canceled the transfers, it happened. My phone lit up with a text from Mom. Mortgage payment due. Bank says insufficient funds. Need $3,000 immediately. Call me. The moment of truth had arrived. With steady hands and a resolute heart, I typed my response. Interesting how you need my help now when I was worth nothing in Dad's will. Perhaps Matthew should manage this, since he received everything. The dam broke. Within minutes, my phone exploded with notifications. Matthew called 4 times in succession, leaving increasingly angry voicemails. What the hell do you think you're doing? His first message demanded. You have no right to interfere with these accounts. By the 4th call, he was threatening legal action for theft and unauthorized access. Mom's texts oscillated between guilt-inducing pleas, "How could you do this to me after everything?" and angry accusations. Your father would be so disappointed in you. Victoria joined the barrage with a particularly venomous message. You pathetic, jealous bitch. We'll sue you for every penny you have. I forwarded each communication to Marcus without responding. His advice was clear. Don't engage individually. Suggest a family meeting where everyone can discuss the situation together, preferably at your mother's home where you'll be on equal footing. With newfound confidence, I sent a single group text. I'm available to discuss the financial situation tomorrow at 2 p.m. at Mom's house. I'll bring documentation of all account activity over the past year. Nathan will accompany me. See you then. The stage was set for confrontation. That night, I reviewed my evidence folder one final time, adding printouts of the threatening messages I'd received. As I placed Dad's pocket watch on top of the stack, my sole inheritance and now a symbol of my resolve, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in my life, I was entering a family encounter not seeking approval, but demanding respect. The tension in Mom's living room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I sat on the edge of the sofa, Nathan beside me, my evidence folder neatly placed on the coffee table between us. Across from me, Matthew paced like a caged animal, his normally perfect appearance disheveled. Victoria perched on the armchair, her cold eyes never leaving my face. Mom sat in Dad's old recliner, looking smaller and older than I remembered, her hands twisting a tissue into shreds. Let's get right to the point, Matthew began, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. You had absolutely no right to interfere with those accounts. The will was clear. Dad left everything to me to manage. Actually, I replied calmly, I had every legal right. I'm still a co-signer on those accounts with equal authorization. Henderson mentioned that during the will reading, if you recall. That was an oversight, Matthew snapped. Obviously, Dad intended for me to have full control. You've always been jealous of my relationship with Dad. This is just your petty revenge. Mom wiped her eyes dramatically. Natasha, how could you do this to us? We're still grieving your father, and now we can't even pay the mortgage. Is that what you wanted? To see us lose our home? The old Natasha would have crumbled under this emotional manipulation. The new Natasha opened her folder and pulled out the first document. This is a transaction history showing $28,000 in transfers from the family accounts to your personal accounts in the month since Dad died, I said, sliding the paper across the coffee table. The mortgage is $2,200 per month. Would you care to explain where the other $25,800 went while Mom's mortgage payment bounced? Victoria leapt to Matthew's defense. That money was for managing family affairs. Matthew has been working tirelessly to sort out your father's estate. He deserves compensation. Compensation like this? I slid another document forward. A credit card statement showing charges at luxury retailers, high-end restaurants, and a weekend spa retreat, all dated after Dad's funeral. Is this how you manage family affairs, Victoria? With $800 shoes and $1,200 handbags. Matthew's face flushed red. You had no right to access those statements. That's invasion of privacy. It's a family credit card account that I'm authorized on, I countered. Every charge on this statement came from the family accounts, not your personal money. Money that was supposed to support Mom and maintain the family properties. Mom looked confused, glancing between us. Matthew told me the accounts were just temporarily low because of funeral expenses and estate taxes. There haven't been any estate taxes paid yet, I said gently, showing her another document. In fact, there are several urgent tax notices here that haven't been addressed at all. Matthew's defensive posture shifted subtly. I've been meaning to get to those. Everything's been overwhelming since Dad died. Overwhelming indeed, I agreed, pulling out the next document. Especially with managing those daily withdrawals to BetRight online casino. $4,000 last month alone. The color drained from Matthew's face as Mom gasped audibly. Victoria's expression hardened as she shot a furious glance at her husband. You promised you'd stopped, she hissed at him before turning to me. That's a private matter that has nothing to do with the family finances. It has everything to do with the family finances when family money is funding the gambling, I replied. And it wasn't just last month. I have statements going back a year showing the pattern. The amounts increased significantly during Dad's illness. Mom looked stricken. Matthew, is this true? You've been gambling with the family money? Matthew's demeanor changed instantly, his anger collapsing into a practiced look of remorse I recognized from childhood. The expression he'd used when caught misbehaving but trying to minimize consequences. It's not what it looks like, he insisted. I've been under tremendous stress managing everything. It was just a temporary release, and I was planning to win it all back and more. Like you won back the $30,000 you lost in March? I asked, revealing another statement. Or the $45,000 from last December. That was the week Dad went into hospice, by the way. While I was arranging 24-hour care, you were on a gambling binge. The revelations kept coming as I methodically presented document after document. The second mortgage Matthew had taken out on the family home without informing Mom. The maxed-out credit cards in Dad's name opened during his final months. The family vacation property listed for sale with the proceeds directed to an account only Matthew could access. Victoria attempted damage control. This is all being taken out of context. We've been consolidating accounts for efficiency, planning investments for Diana's future. Tell them, Matthew. But Matthew had gone quiet, his earlier bravado evaporating in the face of irrefutable evidence. Mom looked shell-shocked, her gaze moving between the documents, and her son with growing comprehension. Why wasn't I told about the second mortgage? She asked in a small voice. Or the credit cards. Robert always handled our finances, but I thought you were just continuing what he was doing, Matthew. Dad asked me to protect you from financial stress. Matthew attempted, but his voice lacked conviction. That's interesting, I said, removing a small digital recorder from my folder. Because that directly contradicts what you told Henderson about Dad's wishes. I pressed play, and Matthew's voice filled the room. My sister doesn't need to know the details of the new arrangement. She's never been good with money. Dad was clear about that. Just make sure everything transfers to my control after he's gone. Mom will follow my lead. The recording, made during a call I'd received accidentally when Matthew had pocket-dialed me during a meeting with Henderson months before Dad's death, landed like a bomb in the room. Mom's face crumpled as the manipulation became clear. You deliberately excluded me from Dad's final arrangements, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. You told them I didn't want to be involved when I was literally providing Dad's daily care. You created this narrative that I couldn't be trusted with money while you were systematically draining the accounts. For the first time, Matthew looked genuinely cornered. It wasn't like that. Dad really did want me to manage everything. He didn't think you were interested in the business side of things. Then explain this, I said, producing my final piece of evidence. Emails between Matthew and Henderson discussing how to structure the will to give Matthew control while maintaining Natasha's caregiving role without financial compensation. A heavy silence fell over the room. Victoria stared at the floor, her earlier confidence shattered. Matthew sat motionless, no longer attempting justifications. Mom looked at her son as if seeing him clearly for the first time. All those years, she whispered, I thought Natasha chose to be independent, that she didn't need our help the way you did. That's what you kept telling us, that she was doing fine on her own, that she preferred it that way. He lied to you, Nathan said quietly, breaking his supportive silence. He's been lying to all of you for years. Mom turned to me, tears streaming down her face. And I believed him. I always believed him. In that moment, the family mythology crumbled completely. The golden son revealed as a manipulator. The supposedly self-sufficient daughter exposed as the one who had actually been supporting everyone all along. The family finances not expertly managed, but systematically plundered. So what now? Matthew finally asked, defeat evident in his voice. You've made your point. What do you want? I closed my folder deliberately. I want what Dad would have wanted if he'd known the truth. I want the family assets protected, Mom's future secured, and accountability for how the money has been spent. I'm not asking for control or ownership. I'm asking for transparency and fairness. Mom nodded slowly, looking years older than she had that morning. I think that's more than reasonable. Matthew, Victoria, I think we need to have a very serious conversation about what's been happening. As the reality of their situation sank in, I felt no triumph, only a sad resolution. The family I had desperately wanted to be valued by had never really existed. But perhaps from these painful truths, something more honest could eventually emerge. The days following the confrontation were tense but productive. With the facts laid bare, we moved into a phase of damage assessment and negotiation. Marcus, my attorney, suggested bringing in a neutral third-party mediator to facilitate discussions and ensure all voices were heard. I agreed immediately, wanting the process to be fair despite the profound betrayal I'd experienced. Our first formal meeting took place in a conference room at Marcus's office building. The mediator, Eleanor Walsh, was a semi-retired judge with a reputation for fairness and an uncanny ability to cut through emotional entanglements to focus on practical solutions. Her no-nonsense approach set the tone from the beginning. We're here to establish facts, identify available resources, and create a plan for moving forward that protects the interests of all family members, she stated, looking directly at each of us in turn. This is not about assigning blame or revisiting past grievances. It's about finding a path forward. Matthew arrived with a different attorney than Henderson, a younger, less polished lawyer named Grant who specialized in financial settlements rather than estate law. The change suggested Matthew recognized he needed practical damage control rather than the family's long-standing legal relationships. My client acknowledges there have been some financial irregularities, Grant began cautiously. However, he maintains that his intentions were to manage family assets in accordance with Robert Wilson's wishes. Eleanor cut through the diplomatic phrasing immediately. Let's be specific about these irregularities. According to the documentation provided, we're talking about approximately $214,000 in unexplained withdrawals over the past 18 months, personal expenses charged to family accounts totaling $67,000, and gambling losses of $112,000, plus a second mortgage of $180,000 with no clear accounting of where those funds went. Is that accurate? The room fell silent as the numbers were laid out so starkly. Mom looked physically ill, while Matthew stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Victoria, noticeably subdued compared to her previous aggression, sat slightly apart from Matthew. Those figures appear broadly consistent with our own assessment, Grant conceded after conferring quietly with Matthew. Then let's start there, Eleanor continued. The first priority must be securing Mrs. Wilson's living situation and ongoing expenses. The mortgage payments need to be brought current immediately to prevent foreclosure proceedings. This practical focus helped cut through the emotional tension. Over the next 3 hours, we established the current state of each account, identified outstanding debts, and created a comprehensive inventory of remaining assets. The picture that emerged was sobering. While Dad had left a substantial estate on paper, Matthew's mismanagement had reduced its actual value by nearly 40%. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten, Matthew admitted during a discussion of the gambling debts. It started small, just a way to blow off steam during Dad's illness. Then I started trying to win back what I'd lost, and it spiraled. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of genuine remorse in my brother's expression. Not just regret at being caught, but actual recognition of the damage he'd caused. Victoria remained largely silent during these admissions, her earlier bravado replaced by tight-lipped calculation. Mom, who had initially seemed shell-shocked, gradually found her voice as the meeting progressed. I need to understand everything from now on, she insisted. I've been too passive about our finances. That stops today. By the end of that first session, we had established some immediate action items, bringing the mortgage current, creating a proper budget for Mom's living expenses, and freezing all non-essential spending from family accounts. Matthew agreed to provide full documentation of all transactions from the past 2 years and to resign as the sole executor of Dad's estate. The power dynamics had shifted palpably. Matthew, accustomed to being the family golden child whose word was law, now found himself accountable to the very people he'd dismissed. His creditors had begun calling during our meeting, his phone buzzing repeatedly with collection notices he tried to ignore. Our second mediation session a week later focused on creating a new, legally binding financial agreement. Eleanor had drafted a proposed settlement that required significant concessions from Matthew while ensuring fair treatment for everyone. This agreement establishes co-trusteeship of all family assets between Diana Wilson and Natasha Wilson, Eleanor explained, distributing copies. It requires full financial transparency, with quarterly accounting reports provided to all parties. It establishes a repayment plan for the misappropriated funds, secured by Matthew's portion of the eventual estate distribution. Matthew looked uncomfortable but resigned. And if I refused to sign? Marcus answered calmly. Then Natasha would be within her rights to pursue criminal charges for financial elder abuse related to the transactions made during your father's illness. Additionally, the evidence supports a civil case that would likely result in much harsher financial penalties. The implied threat wasn't necessary. Matthew knew he had no leverage left. I'll sign, he said quietly. I want to make this right. Victoria seemed less convinced. This is robbery, she hissed. They're taking advantage of a difficult situation to seize control. Eleanor fixed her with a steely gaze. Mrs. Wilson, the documentation clearly shows that you personally spent over $40,000 from family accounts on luxury items in the past year alone. Your name appears on numerous questionable transactions. I would suggest you reconsider your position. Victoria fell silent, her expression unreadable. I suspected her primary concern was protecting her own financial interests rather than supporting Matthew, and wondered how their relationship would weather this crisis. The most emotional moment came during our third and final mediation session. Mom had requested a private conversation with me before we began, asking everyone else to wait outside. When we were alone, she took both my hands in hers. I've been thinking about everything that's happened, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Not just these past weeks, but all the years before. I didn't see what was happening, or maybe I didn't want to see it. Your father and we always found it easier to focus on Matthew because he seemed to need us more. You were so capable, so independent. We told ourselves you were fine on your own. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she continued. But that wasn't fair to you. We should have supported you equally, celebrated your accomplishments, been there when you needed us. Instead, we took you for granted, while giving Matthew everything. I'm so sorry, Natasha. I failed you as a mother. The apology I'd waited a lifetime to hear left me speechless. All I could do was nod as tears blurred my vision. It wasn't a perfect healing. Decades of hurt couldn't be erased with a single conversation, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement of the truth we had both been avoiding. When we rejoined the others, the final agreement was signed with little additional discussion. The terms were straightforward. Mom and I would co-manage all family assets going forward. Matthew would retain his inheritance, but with strict oversight and a structured repayment plan for the misappropriated funds. The family business would be professionally managed rather than entrusted to any individual family member. All outstanding tax issues and debts would be addressed immediately. Matthew signed with a mixture of relief and resignation. I know it doesn't fix everything, he said as he put down the pen, but I am sorry. I never meant for things to get this out of control. Addiction rarely stays within planned boundaries, I replied, thinking of the gambling that had clearly spiraled beyond his control. Have you considered getting help? Something in my tone, concern rather than accusation, seemed to reach him. Victoria and I have been talking about it, he admitted. She's made it clear it's a condition of our marriage continuing. Victoria nodded stiffly, her designer outfit replaced by something notably more subdued. We're both attending financial counseling starting next week, she added. And Matthew has his first appointment with an addiction specialist on Thursday. I was surprised by this glimpse of accountability from both of them. Perhaps hitting rock bottom had forced some genuine reflection. Or perhaps they were simply adapting to their new circumstances, as they had always done. As we prepared to leave, Mom approached me once more. Will you come for dinner next week? She asked hesitantly. Just the two of us? There's so much I want to know about your life. Things I should have asked years ago. In that moment, I recognized that while the legal and financial issues had been resolved, the emotional healing was just beginning. The family dynamics that had shaped all our lives couldn't be rewritten in a few mediation sessions. But perhaps they could be reshaped into something healthier, more honest, and more equal. I'd like that, I replied, surprised to find I genuinely meant it. Not because I was still seeking the approval I'd chased for decades, but because I was curious about what a relationship based on truth might actually look like. As Nathan and I walked to the car afterward, he squeezed my hand. How are you feeling? I considered the question carefully. Like I've put down a weight I didn't even realize I was carrying, I finally answered. Not just the financial situation, but the constant need to prove my worth to people who weren't seeing me clearly. The autumn sun caught the face of Dad's pocket watch as I placed it in my purse, no longer a symbol of exclusion, but a reminder of how far I'd come. 6 months after the mediation sessions, we gathered for Thanksgiving dinner at Mom's house. The atmosphere couldn't have been more different from family gatherings of the past. The dining room table, traditionally a battlefield of subtle slights and unequal attention, had become a more neutral territory where each person's voice carried equal weight. Mom had embraced her new financial independence with surprising enthusiasm. Weekly budget discussions with me had evolved from necessary oversight into genuine bonding experiences. She'd taken a financial literacy course at the community college and spoke proudly of understanding her investments for the first time in her life. I never realized how much I'd surrendered by letting the men in my life handle everything, she told me as we prepared the meal together. Your father wasn't trying to exclude me, but he grew up believing financial management was his domain. I accepted that without question. Matthew arrived without Victoria, who was spending the holiday with her own family, a new arrangement that spoke volumes about the changes in their relationship. He looked healthier than he had in years, the constant stress of hiding his gambling addiction replaced by the clear-eyed calm of recovery. 3 months sober, he said quietly when I asked how his treatment was progressing. It's not easy, but it's better than living with the constant fear of being exposed. He handed me a small wrapped package. This is part of my 9th step, making amends. I can't undo what I did, but I wanted you to have this. Inside was a framed photo I'd never seen before, Dad and me at my college graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling. I found it in his study, Matthew explained. It was on his desk, not hidden away like I told you.
He was proud of you, Natasha.
I was the one who couldn't handle sharing the spotlight. The admission wasn't a magical healing of our fractured relationship, but it was an honest step forward. We were learning to interact as adults with acknowledged flaws rather than playing the assigned roles of golden child and afterthought. Nathan observed these changes with quiet satisfaction. "You stand taller now," he told me later that evening as we walked around the neighborhood after dinner. "You don't shrink yourself anymore when you're with them." He was right. The newfound clarity about my family dynamics had transformed more than just our financial arrangement. It had shifted something fundamental in how I viewed myself. No longer seeking validation I'd never receive, I could engage with my family from a position of earned confidence. This confidence extended to my professional life as well. 3 months after the mediation, I'd been offered a significant promotion at work, one that recognized the leadership skills I'd demonstrated throughout the family crisis. Where once I might have downplayed my accomplishments to avoid making Matthew look bad, I now embraced them openly. Nathan and I had made our own progress, purchasing a modest but charming home together and getting engaged on a weekend trip to the coast. "I fell in love with your strength long before any of this happened," he said as he slipped the ring onto my finger. "But watching you stand up for yourself made me even more certain you're the partner I want for life." Rachel remained my steadfast supporter, celebrating each small victory in my family's evolving dynamic. "What you're describing is actually quite rare," she told me during one of our regular coffee dates. "Most families resist change so strongly that they'd rather maintain toxic patterns than adapt to healthier ones." Mom had made the most surprising transformation. Where once she had automatically defended Matthew and dismissed my concerns, she now made visible efforts to balance her attention and support. She'd begun asking about my work, my interests, my plans for the future, conversations we'd never had during my childhood. "I missed so much of your life," she admitted during one of our now regular dinner dates. "I was so busy worrying about Matthew that I never realized I was neglecting the child who actually had her life together." Of course, old patterns occasionally resurfaced. During a family discussion about holiday plans, Mom automatically deferred to Matthew's schedule before catching herself. "Actually, let's check what works for everyone," she corrected, shooting me an apologetic glance. These moments no longer triggered my old insecurities. Instead, they became opportunities to practice new, healthier responses. Matthew's journey proved more complicated. His gambling addiction treatment revealed deeper issues with self-worth and validation-seeking that mirrored my own struggles in unexpected ways. "The golden child role was its own kind of prison," he explained during a rare moment of vulnerability. "I was terrified of failing, of being discovered as a fraud who didn't deserve the favoritism." Victoria had initially resisted the family's new financial transparency, but gradually adapted as she recognized the stability it provided. She and Matthew attended couples counseling, working through the resentments and enabling patterns that had characterized their relationship. Whether their marriage would survive remained uncertain, but they were at least confronting their issues honestly. The practical outcomes of our mediation agreement had proved successful beyond expectation. With professional management, the family business had stabilized and begun generating consistent income again. The tax issues Matthew had neglected were resolved, though with significant penalties that came from his portion of the assets. Mom's financial security was assured, with regular accounting reports providing peace of mind for everyone. As for Dad's watch, my sole inheritance had taken on new meaning. What once felt like a token gesture now represented something more nuanced. Perhaps Dad, in his own limited way, had tried to give me something personally meaningful rather than just financial assets. I would never know his true intentions, but I'd made peace with the uncertainty. During a quiet moment on Christmas Eve, as the family gathered in Mom's living room, I reflected on how much had changed in a single year. Last Christmas, Dad had been in hospice, the family dynamics firmly entrenched in their dysfunctional patterns. Now, those patterns had been disrupted, creating space for something healthier to grow. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan asked, noticing my contemplative mood. That sometimes the most painful revelations lead to the most necessary changes, I replied. I would never have chosen to discover my family's betrayal, but without that moment in the attorney's office, nothing would have changed. The journey from invisibility to recognition hadn't been easy, but it had been essential. By refusing to accept the role assigned to me, I had not only protected my family's financial future but also catalyzed a transformation in relationships that had seemed permanently fixed. The forgotten daughter had finally been seen, not because others chose to see her, but because she demanded recognition. As I look back on this challenging year, I realize the most important lesson wasn't about money or inheritance or even family dynamics. It was about the power of standing up for yourself when necessary, about refusing to accept less than you deserve. Sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most healing outcomes. Sometimes you have to be willing to disrupt everything to build something better. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who weren't treating you fairly? What gave you the courage to finally draw that line in the sand? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find their voice. And if this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to see more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself.